Hi everyone, and welcome to the Audio Production Town Hall. I'm your host today, Brian Smithers. I'm the Program Director of Audio Production. Our Audio Production Town Hall is broadcast on a monthly basis in week 4 as a way of bringing together all of our students across the degree program. Whether you're in your first month or your last month, you're welcome to join us on a monthly basis for the Town Hall, where we get together with faculty members and graduates and guests and friends and talk about the sort of things that audio nerds talk about when we get together. So you may, in any given month, hear us talking about mixing or mastering or making music or making sound effects or games or film or software. A lot of the different things that are part and parcel of our fascination with the audio discipline. Today I'm joined by Lee Riley, who is the course director of Game Audio Production Techniques. How are you doing today, Lee?
I'm doing great, thank you, Brian.
Thank you for
having me over here.
We really appreciate your time today. We're going to talk about your involvement with an interactive theme park project and how tools that are normally designed for use with game audio applied to this project.
Absolutely, yes.
Super. So you started out as a musician professionally.
That is correct.
Performing, writing songs, touring a bit, and then you got into the recording side of things, which is a natural progression for a young musician. Eventually did an associate's degree here at Full Sail.
Yes.
Became a faculty member.
Yes.
Working with me developing our original audio workstations and advanced audio workstations courses.
That is correct.
And then taught audio post in the film program here. And then taught audio post back here in recording arts.
That's correct.
You've done ADR work, Foley work, mixing. You've written music for film and television.
Yep.
And then you've also worked in games.
I have, yes.
Awesome. Did I miss anything important?
I don't think so.
So the reason I bring this up is not just to make you blush, but because I think it's important. It's important for all of our students to understand how the trajectory of your career can take you in all sorts of unexpected directions.
Certainly does, yes. If I had to quantify it, I just couldn't believe this big arc, starting right at the beginning, getting into, as a small child, I was just talking to you about watching Doctor Who, on TV back in England, and all the fascinating sound design elements to that, and I really wondered how they made those sounds, the Dalek sounds, the incredible music at the beginning. This is the 60s shows, the 70s shows, Tom Baker and John Pertwee. And then I started recording the radio off, basically tapes. You remember those little cassettes that we used to have, and recording those things and going tape to tape and trying these different things and trying to recreate all these different sounds. And that's what started me, to be a musician, and then just exactly what you said. Yeah, that's the trajectory. Yes.
That's great. So even though you were first professionally a musician, it was really sound design was one of the things that really first fascinated you about this whole career.
Yeah, I think so. That's really what it was. It was a little non-traditional style of music, and especially with keyboards and synthesizers, and that's really what led me down the path of going the sound design route, and listening to things a little bit differently than everybody else, and the sound of a bottle, or the sound of what something makes, and you're thinking, well, you're a strange kid, and I was, yes, I am a strange kid. So that's what leads to the love of it later on, and actually doing it as a profession, So.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of intricate fascination really makes a difference when it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you've been working for 16 hours and you're not done yet, and it just has to be exactly right before you turn it in, right?
Well, yes, of course, that's fantastic. But of course, you always get these little change notes, which you can deal with professionally and go, yes, okay, we'll change that for you, and that's it. That's all part of the process, But I found that out really quickly, That's it.
Yeah. You put your heart and soul into tweaking
Yes.
something, making it sound what you think is perfect, and
Yes.
then a producer says, no, that's not quite right.
It should be more green or more purple.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Oh, of course.
I'll get
That's
right
what I was
on that.
thinking.
Cool. So, can you tell us a little bit about this interactive theme park project that you worked on for about 2 years?
Yeah, 2.5 years of my life, yes.
Yeah.
What an amazing time. It was for Universal Creative and Nintendo, and it was the Super Nintendo World in Osaka, in Japan. And I was approached 4 years ago now, I guess, 3.5, 4 years ago now, by a colleague here in town, and we were already working on for Universal Creative anyway as contractors. And he said, okay, we've got the big one here. And I says, okay, what have we got? And we have to recreate the entire catalog, or so we thought, of Mario sound for a theme park across the planet. And I said, no worries. So that's 4 years ago. That's when it started, and we started recreating the sound and recreating all the music for it. We ended up doing things interactively. So we did things in AR, we did things in VR. We used Wise as a middleware into Unity. So we had to become very, very familiar with the workings of middleware in this particular environment. And it's really no different at the end of the day, where it was a video game, in practices I'd done before, trying to engineer this for 52 carts going around the same track every 4 minutes, I think it was.
Yeah.
So with 4 computers on each cart, so yeah.
Wow.
Do the math.
Wow. Well, my impression of most theme park sound is that it's pretty linear. You move along a fixed path, and Jack Sparrow pops out and says the same line every time at the same point in the line. I'm guessing what you're describing is more interactive and variable than that.
It was interactive as far as the Mario Kart. The outside of the Mario Kart was a little bit more interactive, and I'll explain that in a minute. But the Mario Kart environment was that, yes, you have a set track, and the thing is, though, the person wearing the goggles, you would have a set pattern that would happen every time, but then it depends where you look. Right. So wherever your headset is your interaction with the characters. So there's that. We had to design that element into it as well, just to make things a bit more complicated. But to pull off AR and VR in that kind of environment was really interesting, and keep it above all reliable. Every single pass. And you technically like a 24-hour run, right? It's just one of those things. You have to have all of those carts running simultaneously, constantly, all day. Yeah.
That's a lot to bite off. You must have had a crew of dozens working for you.
No. Just 2 of us, really. 2 of us, and we had a couple of other teams in support, but they were just at different parts of the park. The vast scale of this thing was incredible. It was just jaw-dropping. Wow. Walking in, but some of them were dealing with. I was finishing off assets and giving it to them through Workspace, and basically they take that and implement that and then mix that. So then I'd oversee that, and it was just a huge project that was just really satisfying at the end of the day. Obviously I was there in Japan for 2 months, implementing everything, and this little thing called COVID happened, and unfortunately, had to come back, and that's the only thing that I I would still love to be there now, but of course, here I am,
Yeah, if you'd stayed another week, you probably would still be there now.
Yes, very true.
Well, that sounds like a pretty massive project for a team of basically you and someone else.
Yes, Danny Donati. Both of us worked with Donati Media. Yes, that was a huge task, and we did. Danny was the audio director. He really dealt mostly with the music side of things because he said, "Look, I'm going to deal with this completely. You deal with the sound design elements. Somewhere down the road, we'll mesh all this together." And we did. We just somehow pulled it off. It was great. Yeah.
Wow. So you brought up a couple of terms that not all of our students have experienced yet. You talked about the game engine, Unity,
Yep.
and Wise, the middleware. So in a typical game, you have everything that goes on in the game being generated in real time. All of the characters' motions, environments, all of the sounds that go along with them are rendered by the game in real time, and that's the job of the game engine, to allow you to put all of those images and sounds in there, and then it controls what people see. Can you talk about what middleware is, how it relates to that, and why these tools, normally associated with game audio, were essential to the design of this theme park?
Oh, absolutely, yes, because it's at any given time, like you say, there is a direct call from the engine itself, but then there's a few variables that could happen. So the middleware is you're gonna have those sounds stored in that middleware, ready to be called. You do have an idea, with it being as a theme park, as we say, you have that reciprocating 4 minutes. It's not exactly the same thing as a game environment, because that person who's playing the game could just go off on a complete tangent.
Right.
Whereas this is a fairly set thing. But the middleware is your direct link to assign the sounds to certain objects, and those objects are variable to a degree, and you can set certain variations in it. And that's the beauty of it. It's constantly evolving, but it's still under a controlled environment, if you will.
Right.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So in dealing with this, you were working with some titles that are pretty well established in the minds of, frankly, generations of gamers.
Yeah.
So were you allowed to or required to work with any of the original source sounds?
That was a great question. We started off what I want to say, Hollywoodizing everything. That was the whole concept, was the East meets West, and we basically designed everything with a universal spin to it. So the whole concept was, let's go in there. We didn't know if we could initially use the sounds legally. And then I'm thinking, well, how are we going to pull this off? So I had to listen very, very carefully, do a lot of research, and figure out, how can I recreate those sounds from the 1980s? Which chipset did they use? What kind of materials did they use to create those iconic sounds? How am I going to do this? And I almost pulled it off, but then they came to my rescue at the end of it. And the original sound design team, we basically met them, and they said, look, we want to help you with this. We want to give you licensing to do this.
Oh, wow.
And say, well, here are the original one-up sounds. Here's the original Mario. And I got to re-record Mario himself, and Daisy and Peaches, the original people, which was fantastic. It was great to do. So we weren't rehashing any dialogue lines. We redid those dialogue lines. We did rehash some reactions, but the sounds themselves were kind of a hybrid between my flavor to it with some of the original sounds that they had. Yeah.
So what may not be immediately evident to everyone is that in the early game consoles, there was an extraordinary limitation of resources. The memory and processing power available on what we think of as classic gaming platforms was, by today's standards, extremely limited. And so sound designers would have to reduce the bit depth, reduce the sample rate, eventually use data reduction codecs, and chop them really short and reuse them and squeeze them through this meat grinder in order to get them to sound interesting and compelling with the least amount of resources possible. Tell me about the process of taking a teeny tiny microscopic imitation of a sound and putting it into a theme park with speakers everywhere and big space and big expectations.
Yeah, it's a great question again. It's this, you're taking something that's a few kilobytes, which is more or less half a second or a quarter of a second, and then thinking, well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to use that original sound or just slightly change it? Even if there's a slight reverb tail in it, we get kickback sometimes. So to do that, they'd be like, oh, this is 3 milliseconds too big. But then you'd have, how would you do that in certain speakers? And how would you'd have, for example, there was one I remember, outside there was a binoculars for the kids to go up to, and then they'd zoom in and zoom out, and then they'd see the world, they'd see the actual world themselves, and then they'd have the characters interacted into the shot you're looking through, an actual view lens.
Right, so the binoculars were basically AR binoculars. Nice.
Yeah, so basically you're looking at then plus everything else in 3D. And to do all that stuff, and we said, okay, this sounds great, and we're implementing it, we're testing it, but we didn't realize that they had this speaker that's probably this big out the bottom of it, and there's just one speaker. And we're thinking, oh, we're going to be all surround sound here, we're going to be multi-channel things, or whatever it may be, but there's this one speaker that this sound comes out of. And that can sound great on your own laptop. It can sound great on a speaker system as you go through a theme park when things are blasting at you. But when it's, this little speaker, it's really, really challenging, so.
So even in a theme park that's big as all outdoors, the audio team still gets the short end of the stick.
Very much, yes. And we have to carefully think how to make things better.
Okay. All right, that's disappointing, but it's the sort of thing that we deal with in all sorts of things.
Absolutely, any facet.
Best sound effects getting buried by a line of dialogue or a swell of the score. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's just awesome. Cool. So if you can share anything without having to, shoot us all afterward, tell us about working with the original talent and re-recording. Did you have to blend classic lines of dialogue with new lines of dialogue, or is all the dialogue in the attraction newly recorded with the original actors?
They did keep some originals. Of course, you're going to have classic lines, of course.
Yeah.
And then you're going to add some more. You're going to, because this is a different environment, right? You're in a, for example, in Mario Kart, we had to have specific lines for that attraction.
Right.
Then we'd have specific lines for certain other parts of the theme park. But let's go and all that stuff. Of course, that was I had a chuckle recording that one, and to actually have the the original person do that was fantastic. But yeah, we pretty much kept to the script, but we had a lot of different stuff added as well. So so it's kind of both, really. I hope that answered the question.
Well, it does, but I guess it must be similar to what we go through with, the latest iteration of a classic game.
Sure.
You've got,
Yes.
we've got, NBA 2K, 2K1, 2K, and you expect some of the same things, some
To
of the
follow
things,
over.
especially with something that's, a Mario Kart kind of world.
Yes.
You expect a lot of carryover and a lot of new things, so I imagine it's similar.
Yeah, because you have your characters, the certain characters that always say that. They always behave that certain way. That's the kitschy part of it, the beautiful part of it, the fact that that's the whole brand. That's basically what it is, and it's, as long as you stick to that and you get, someone else is writing it, we're just recording it, right? At the end of the day, and it's it all works out at the end of the day. So.
That's pretty cool. So tell us about some of the challenges with the implementation. When you, after working for months and months on all of these sounds and specifying how they should work, then you actually got to see them for over the course of 2 months of testing and mixing and revision. Tell us about that process and some of the challenges associated with seeing it actually implemented and making it work the way you envisioned.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you go into that project thinking, well, 50%, you think, oh, this is all going to be fantastic, but let's be realistic, you have to be in situ before you can actually hear how that sounds in that particular place, hear how it reacts, hear how it gets triggered. Is that a little bit too long of a sound? How is that sound together with 250 others?
Yeah.
And you're working with someone who, one part of the team wants all 250 firing at the same time. There's other parts of the team that think, no, let's listen to the sound team and say, let's have 5 that it's going to go at the same time. And then hear them in their context as they're around you. But just implementing them, we got really, really lucky because there's so much testing prior to going. But then, as we say, when we get there and we listen to it through that equipment and moving and on a cart, and then physically, I had to run 2 laptops, Mac and PC, rather interesting. And the drivers as well, dealing with the drivers and getting it actually into the PCs and spitting out of the PCs into the speakers.
Wow.
And getting the drivers to work correctly and working harmoniously with every other department and testing each build, and the build broke, and then, there's all these things that you just don't expect. You think, okay, the sound is awesome, we've got it all covered. But then the build breaks, or something, there's a bug in it, or something happens where it stops your sound that you designed to happen right at this point. It didn't fire.
Yeah.
So then you have to go back and try and re-break it to see if it's actually going to work, or if it's going to break in the same place again. So that troubleshooting is such... It was such an unusual thing for me, because it's not like a game, it's not like a film, it's not like TV. It's constantly changing, if you will. Mm-hmm. So that was the blessing and the curse of the whole thing. But it was so rewarding when we got it all done. That's really what it was.
So not to oversell it, but what you're saying is that in addition to being a sound designer, you also need to be a troubleshooter and detective.
Yes, absolutely, at all times. Troubleshooting 101, 201, 301, 401, 501. Every detective novel you've ever written and read in your life. Yes, it's all part and parcel of the job, and I really stress that to the students, that all the way through your different levels and courses, that this is something you really have to imagine and try and ask your instructors, give me something that's going to break.
Yeah.
And what do I do when it does break? You know, that's one of those things. It's not about everything working fantastically 24 hours a day. It'll never do that. You've always got to prepare yourself for that contingency, whether it be ADR, whether it be recording talent. A small tidbit, I was recording Joey Fatone, and I was recording him, and one of my video cards just fried right as we're 15 minutes into the session.
Wow.
And the producers on the other end of Skype at the time were not very patient. So I had no idea what was going on. It just kept crashing Pro Tools. So the video card was doing this. So thinking, fast, changing things, trying different things, you know, dealing with your clients, dealing with the talent, and dealing with all that stuff and keeping a level head through the whole thing. And it's such a, you know, to be prepared for that, you know, it's just an incredible thing. Just experience and time and doing things over and over and over and super repetitive. That's the only way of getting it locked down, you know. So,
Right.
yeah.
So no one likes to have something go wrong.
No.
But if you have something go wrong in a non-stressful situation, you kind of need to embrace it as a learning opportunity, don't you?
Absolutely. It's one of those things that if this happened in a situation where everything's not on you for that second, this is like, wow, I just had a great learning experience, yeah, for sure, because then the nature of my being is with, I used to say this when I was at Universal on property. I was next door to Danny, who hired me for the Universal Creative gigs. We both took it upon ourselves to try and break things and take things 150% past their capacity, just to see what would happen and be prepared for every single contingency. And that's our nerddom, I guess. That was let's see if this can happen, let's see if that can happen. And we were always, I'd say, punishing ourselves, because if we had everything working, we couldn't just leave it alone. We just had to make sure that everything was, let's challenge ourselves every single minute of the day. But at the end of that day, you could take on anything. You could take on anything. If anything went wrong, you'd know exactly what went wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
So, in the process of creating these sounds, were all of the sounds basically synthesized, created sounds for this milieu, or were some of them actually natural recorded sounds?
It was a hybrid, really. It's a great question, because once you go through your courses and your different sound design courses along the way, you're gonna be asking that same question. It's like, how do I do this? You know, like I said, it goes back to me listening. Always listen. You know, always listen to the sounds that things make. And I was doing things organically. In other words, recording them with a microphone. I was using sound libraries, and I was also using synthesis. So, all three.
Cool.
And sometimes my voice, actually, as well, which was interesting.
Awesome. So if we went to this theme park and spent a day there, we'd
I have some gems in there.
have
Yes.
some. Okay. Did you manage to get anything in there that you would consider kind of an Easter egg that most people won't notice, but would make you laugh every time you go?
I did. There was one character, you know what, and I forgot the character's name now. It's a little, not a jellyfish, but an octopus, I guess, and I can't remember its actual name. And of course, some of the times we had to learn the Japanese names of those.
Oh, right.
So, oops, I just lost my laugh. Anyway.
I'm sure someone out there listening to this knows the name of that little character that you're referring
Maybe
to.
so.
Maybe they'll tell us in the
Extra
chat.
credit in my class when you get there. So designing that, I was using balloons, and I was getting these incredible squeaky sounds, and I hid them pretty well. I had to be very, very careful. It's not as, I wouldn't say I had the same luxury that I did working on feature films and stuff. You could hide some really nasty stuff in there. And I'd try and hide 4 different sounds in every single feature film I worked on. And I would explain them when you ask me them when you get to my course, and I'll tell you what those sounds are.
So you were talking earlier about trying to figure out what synthesizers were actually used to create some of these original sounds. How far down the rabbit hole did you go with that process?
I mean, there was a couple of plugins that we could get hold of. There was actually like a Mario chip kind of plugin. It was great, but it just didn't work, you know. But the actual physical synthesizers, we went down the rabbit hole of Roland, Korg. I fell back in love with some 80s synths a little while ago when I was redoing some karaoke tracks. That's a whole nother story.
That's another town hall.
That's another town hall. So I was doing this stuff, and then Arturia makes this wonderful DX7.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course, I start going through these DX7 patches, and I start going through some Juno 6 patches, and and I'm like, okay, this is this. Oh, this is this. I can easily manipulate this with a little ADSR tricks and high-pass filters and low-pass filters and pole filters and all these good things. You could actually get in there and tweak it so that I'd get at least a good base of the sound there. Because, sometimes as a good sound designer, won't just grab one sound or one layer and say, here you go.
Right.
Some things you have to do that when you're told to, of course. But I would. This is part of the mythology in my mind of breaking things. Putting tons of layers in there. So at any given time, someone could say, "I just don't like that bell quality of that. Can you remove that bell?" And if you only have 2 layers and bell's one of them, then you're kind of stuck. So, you build it in layers and create all these different elements. But Roland, Yamaha, Korg, lots of stuff from back in the day, and Monopoly, and just so many great synths that were out there that could recreate those sounds.
That's cool. I'll bet that took you back to your keyboard playing days.
Oh boy, yes. Oh boy.
So the idea of layering sounds, I think, is a pretty important one, and tell me if I'm off base on this. But the thing that occurs to me is that when you are in a physical space and you hear sounds, there is so much going on with a sound in terms of reflections, in terms of a footstep over there being layered with 6 fans over there, and air conditioning, and vehicle noise outside the door, and our chairs creaking, and all this stuff. That to try to recreate that one footstep as just a footstep, just a single recording of a footstep, is destined to be inadequate. And so you have to blow it up with additional layers, with additional variations underneath, something that's got a good attack, something that's got a good foot press, and so forth, because trying to get an authentic, a real, genuine, well-played recording of one person's footstep is never going to be adequate coming back from a speaker.
No. It's, and I've worked with Ben on this. We go through all different surfaces, all different shoes or footwear, whatever, just different microphones. And it'd sound great if you were listening to it without headphones and you just heard the actual sound itself in real life, right? Whatever the sound you just created. but then you put it in that environment with everything else, and it's just, whoa, it just doesn't work. So sometimes you have to do something you would not initially think of, some kind of pitching it, or just adding layers that you wouldn't even think of. That's the whole beauty of it. It's a blessing and it's a curse. You think, well, okay, this is great. I'll just do 10 footsteps and we'll call it a day.
Right.
And then you're on a round robin of 10 footsteps, and that is so repetitive. Like clink clonk, clink clonk, clink clonk, clink clonk, clink clonk. No. So yeah, it's definitely the different surfaces, the different type. Just going 150% over the top, I think, is something we always used to do. We could always back it off, but start at 150% and work your way back. Hopefully that answered the question.
It does. If anybody has any questions for Lee, please share those questions in the
Shout
chat,
them out,
and
please.
we'll be happy to answer them. And if you don't, we'll just keep on talking.
Keep on talking.
We can.
I think we can do that.
We can do that. Yeah, we had to kind of filter this down to just the essentials to keep it within our time
Instead of the
frame.
3 hour.
So, if anybody were to look you up on IMDb, which you probably should do, they're going to find that you have been an ADR mixer for a lot of television shows that they've heard of. I mean, you have in your catalog all of the major networks represented, and a lot of really top-level shows. And two things occur to me about that. One is the potential difference of doing the same job for different production companies and different networks. And the second is that I have a sneaking suspicion that ADR mixer is a really inadequate description of the job.
I really personally hate the description. It is, in England, I work with ADR recordists, so they call themselves recordists. A recordist over here is someone who basically jots it down and writes the takes and circles the takes. So the ADR mix themselves, yes, technically you're using a mixer, but you're not post-mixing it.
Right.
It's mixing, you're basically, at any given time throughout that whole process, I could be, someone's on the other end of Zoom or a Source Connect listening in, it could be a director or an ADR supervisor, and that person could say, hey, can you play me back take 6, 6A or 6C, if they did a row of 3, blend that in with the guide track or without the guide track, blend that in with the music track we sent to you and the sound effects. So you are mixing it on the fly, technically, and you have to have fingers of lightning, basically, to make sure that you're dealing with talkbacks, going out to them, talkbacks to the talent. So it is kind of you're doing a lot of things and juggling, plates all at the same time. It's just, it's such a fascinating field, really, and it is. You're working with fantastic talent, and you're working on great shows, and at any given time, like we said before, reliability could be an issue. That's always over your shoulder, going, hey, I'm going to be unreliable any second, or this connection will get cut, or something will happen. But of course, but the fantastic thing is getting those great takes, getting that performance, giving it back in time with picture, and making sure that everything, works. That's. But ADR mixer, sorry, yes, I hate the descriptor. I wish it was something else. But yeah, it's.
ADR wizard might be more
I don't know. I
appropriate,
guess guy who records. I don't know.
But you really are at least in the U.S. market. you are the person doing all of the recording and really engineering the session soup to nuts.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in my situation, being not being part of a big team, I would have to take the initial, basically the scheduling, deal with the scheduling. Make sure I receive the picture, make sure I receive all the cues, the individual lines that need to be recorded. Put those into a Pro Tools session, get it all set up, make sure we have a great connection, make sure we test the connection, deal with the director, deal with a sound supervisor, deal with the talent here, deal with SAG after the unions, and deal with on the back end after everything's finished. And this is all at the same time wearing masks and making sure everything's sanitized. Right. And I went through all that stuff, in 2020 and 2021, and making sure that everyone was ultimately safe, including myself. And it's a great thing to do, really. It's just, but that's what I love about it. 1 minute, I could be involved in the sound designing job. Mm-hmm. And then next minute, it's, hey, we need you to record these lines of dialogue for this TV show. And I'm like, well, great, let's do it, or design something for a game, or come on one of these shows, and just basically just talk about your life. Yeah,
which is why your company is called
Anything Audible.
Which is exactly what you do.
Constantly listening, but constantly talking at the same time. I don't know. Yeah.
That's very cool. So,
have we bored anybody yet? We may have done.
No, not a chance. Not a chance. No. When you interview me, then we'll.
Okay.
So, maybe next month. So, you said the whole Nintendo project was for and in Japan. And to what extent was travel, time zones, language, cultural expectations, personal interactions, to what extent was working in... I know you've traveled internationally, so you are not as parochial as I am. So it probably was less of a surprise to you. But to what extent did that affect your workflow?
It was really just the whole build up to it, and then someone says, "Well, here we go. Here's a flight we have to make. We have to be there by a certain time." We were given 2 days to adjust. Wow. Thankfully.
Wow.
To decompress, because technically, yes, you are flying across the other end of the earth.
Yeah.
I was enjoying phone calls back and forth between here. 13 hours difference.
Yeah.
So basically, you had to constantly think, and then of course I had my phone going, okay, think for me and tell me what time it is everywhere. And then I'd still have clients actually calling from LA.
Right.
Or emailing me from LA. So then I go, okay, well, what is that time zone difference?
Yeah.
And hopefully I'm not waking them up, or if I call them. So you're constantly thinking this time, not just that. And then the cultural, completely great cup of coffee, by the way, over there. And it was basically $1 for a coffee. It was fantastic.
Wow.
Anyway, getting subway timetables, doing all this with a mask when I'd never experienced that before, because the Japanese culture over there was everyone was wearing masks anyway. Mm-hmm. And then you get on the subway and then there's no English. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that makes sense because the English language is so far away. I mean, Australia is or Hong Kong maybe, is the closest thing, and really you don't, have I lost my lab again?
You're good.
I hate to be someone who's muffled. And then you're thinking, well, the English language, it's Chinese is, well, the Japanese, of course, then Chinese was the next, and then Korean was the next, and then when you were lucky enough, it was in English.
Right.
And having this timetable, but the saving grace, I think, for me, being a European, was it just felt like Europe to me.
Oh.
It was probably in the 30s and 40 degrees. And someone who has been in Florida for 20-something years, that was the biggest shock. And buying jackets, and I thought, oh, I'll just have a couple of jackets, and you know. But the culture, yes, it was just a fascinating culture, dealing with Americans, dealing with Italians, dealing with everyone from all over the planet, and then having Japanese clients as well. But fantastic.
That's very cool.
Anyway, I could talk about this forever, but yeah.
Yes, we could, but
Unfortunately, unfortunately, yes.
Well, Lee, thank you so much for coming on to the Audio Production Town Hall and for sharing your experience with us.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Anytime.
I'm sure your students in coming months will be asking you plenty of questions about this.
I look forward to it. Yes, please do.
Awesome. So, everyone out there, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us. This is recorded and archived and available after real time. Keep an eye out once a month for the Audio Production Town Hall, where we engage all sorts of audio nerd topics of general and specific interest, and we hope you will join us and bring a friend next time. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Bye now.